Let's crack on. So today we've got hot soft skills. So let's crack on, shall we? Eileen, it's over to you on this segment today. Do you want to kick off?
It is, yes. I'm trusting you to press the buttons at the right places. So for those of you who've been kind of keeping an eye on what we've been doing, this week we've been finishing off the PMO as a business function report. And two of the key behaviours that seem to be repeated time and time again during the report were pragmatism and resilience. So I thought I would just spend a couple of minutes just kind of reinforcing some of the behaviours that, regardless of what role we play in the PMO, we have to demonstrate on an all too frequent basis. So if we look at pragmatism, first of all, we define pragmatism, if you press the button, pragmatism in the competency framework. We talk about paying attention to detail, and it is really important where that attention to detail, and the details are really important. But we do have to be pragmatic around some of the things that perhaps are not as perfect as we want. And we do need to kind of recognise that in some cases there is a bigger picture which is more important. We often get accused of being the template police and walking around with our truncheons and taking glee when we find somebody who's done something kind of not quite right. And it's really about kind of getting that balance right between paying attention to the right things. So if we go on to the next slide, what I've just got is some examples of perhaps where we might have to think about, is it really important for us to continue to kind of drive through to the detail? So for the PMO administrator, where we've gone to get a project report or a project summary or minutes of a meeting, and we realise that they've actually used the old template, and it can be hugely frustrating. And we just have to think in terms of, if actually it's got all of the information we actually need, then there's perhaps a piece of work we can kind of transfer it over. But we just have to think about, is it worth really, if they've gone to the trouble of actually providing all of the correct information, do we actually need to kind of create a big thing about that? As a PMO analyst, perhaps we're putting together the project plan, and what we find is that there's some kind of various amounts of details, but either because there's been a shortage of time or because of where it is in the planning process, we actually find that actually there's been a number of bucket tasks being put in that plan where it's not absolutely clear in terms of exactly what activities are actually going to be undertaken. And again, we have to look at that bigger picture to say, well, actually, in the grand scheme of things, if that's 6 months further down the line, we've got time over the next couple of months to kind of do that in a little bit more detail. So again, thinking about what's the correct level of detail we need to be working at. By the time it gets to the PMO manager, and we've spent quite a bit of time over the last kind of couple of months talking about this concept of a service catalogue and moving from a support-based PMO to a service-based PMO. And depending on our customer set, it can be quite frustrating where actually they still just want generic support, and we end up having to put that in as a service, which is basically anything else you want us to do. And I think it can be kind of quite frustrating in terms of looking at how much time that perhaps takes. So really start thinking about, well, we do still want to be customer focused. We still want to demonstrate we add value where needed, but actually start thinking about perhaps kind of how much time we need to kind of do to that particular service. And then I think the final element is as a PMO director, where we're kind of going through the prioritisation process and putting things in the portfolio, we're still going to get those JFDI projects where, regardless of the business case, if there isn't a business case at all, the PMO director is going to be instructed to just do it. Now, add your own F Yeah, so I think there are times when, and there are sometimes, if that project is something that's really important, that's urgent, that needs to be done, you can understand why that might be required, and we have to think about how we're going to balance that off. But there are times when actually we just need that to be undertaken and get on and do with it. So that's pragmatism. I'm happy to share all of your other examples in chat where you've had to do with them. If we go on and have a look at resilience, and so we've taken the definition there from the competence framework as ever, to be resilient and maintain a positive attitude. And sometimes it can be really difficult to maintain that positive attitude, particularly if we flip on, particularly in those situations where, as we've just mentioned, we've tried to instill a level of kind of discipline and the right level of governance, and we're still finding that the team is not necessarily fully bought in. So if you go forward one, Lindsay, just a couple of things for us to kind of think about. You can just tap them all at once if you want, Lindsay. Just that kind of first one there, I don't know whether people know the great way about don't let them ground us down, is the old kind of saying. And really is this ability to kind of bounce back and keep coming and recognising what we're there to do, recognising it's going to be important. And sometimes that breathe is really important, and sometimes it takes a number of breaths before you can kind of really kind of think that, I've told them 100 times about where the new template is. I've been through the planning process 100 times and they're still not listening. And really, it's really useful then to actually use your PMO team or your PMO network. And this is, kind of one of the reasons why we do things like this, is to give you the opportunity to say, look, I've been in this situation, I'm getting really frustrated. How do I go back with a positive attitude to still focus on moving them forward? And I think that's my last point, really, in terms of, when we're really struggling, think, well, actually, where were we last month? Where were we kind of 6 months ago? And actually kind of focus on the kind of the bigger picture of moving people forward rather than just kind of focus on the individual tiny steps, because I think they'll find everybody's on here has been in a situation where it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and some days it's 2 steps forward, 3 steps back before we have to take the next 2 steps forward. So just a couple of the kind of the key behaviours that are identified in the competency framework.
All right, super duper. Thank you very much. And these two, of course, are also figured in the latest Inside PMO report, which gets launched at the PMO conference on the 15th of June, which is this time is called the PMO as a business function. So you can all look forward to that.